Hello, welcome to One Week, One Year, a podcast where we watch and discuss a year of film history every week, starting from 1895, the dawn of cinema. This week, 1899. I am host number one, Chris Ellie, a film projectionist, and sitting across the computer from me is host number two.
I am host number two, Glenn Covell, film person, filmmaker, and enthusiast.
Yes, as we all are. Otherwise, why would you be listening to a podcast like this?
Indeed.
So yeah, this is our 5th year of making this podcast. We've been doing this podcast for 5 years, right?
Well, wait, is it 5?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
1895, 6, 7, 8, 9. 5 years.
Oh, good. Yeah, right, because, never mind. I can do math.
Yeah, it's all right. Yeah, I actually springing this on you because I didn't discuss this earlier. But do you have any reflections on the last
the last 5 years,
the first 5 years of film history?
I definitely learned a lot watching these. I hadn't seen most of them. I think I'd seen a grand total of maybe 3 from the 5. Like 3 films total of like out of the I don't know how many dozens scores that we've seen by now.
Yeah, definitely overdoing it a bit at the beginning here.
Well, and just there are so many things that are like pretty significant innovations or sort of turning points. I don't say turning points, but like very innovative things that I had never seen or sort of even heard about.
Yeah, it's cool to see. It's cool to see people like really experiment. People like Méliès like really experimenting with the form very quickly. I'm kind of surprised by how much progress was made within just a couple years, which is good for the podcast because otherwise it would be extremely boring. Because I don't know. I feel like if you look at something like video games. From the very earliest ones to something of a somewhat like real level of complexity, it's like 10 years or something like that.
Yeah, and that's pretty quick, I think, for like an evolving art form.
Yeah, I guess so. And I mean that complexity I'm talking about is just like Pac-Man or something.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I think what was the point I was going to make? You can definitely see the kind of evolution from it being kind of more of a scientific and like novelty thing. It's like, oh, look, it's like a picture, but it moves. Ooh.
Yeah.
To people like Méliès just going whole ham and like, no, we can tell stories with this. We can do magic with it. We can create things that you wouldn't be able to do in any other medium.
Yeah, specifically things that you couldn't do in another medium, because he was a magician beforehand, but now he is literally doing magic with the medium of film, which I think is really cool.
Yeah.
So much potential. Anyway, yeah, I think in this year we have seen a lot more advances. We're starting to see these advances that have been being made solidified into the actual film form. But before we get to talking about the movies this week, why don't you bring us up to speed on the news of the year 1899?
The news of the year 1899. Spanish-American War comes to a close with the Treaty of Paris. Cuba, Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines are ceded to the U.S., but the Philippine Republic doesn't go without a fight. The Philippine-American War begins. The Great Arctic Outbreak of 1899 blankets the country in feet of snow and sub-zero temperatures. Outlaw woman Pearl Hart conducts one of the final stagecoach robberies ever recorded. The paperclip is invented. Mile-a-Minute Murphy earns his name by becoming the first man to complete such a feat on a bicycle, drafting behind a Long Island Railroad train to gain speed. Alfred Dreyfus is finally pardoned, bringing an end to the whole sordid Dreyfus Affair. Extray, extray! Newsboys go on strike. Joseph Pulitzer and William Randolph Hearst increase bulk newspaper prices and the Little Tykes fight back. Scott Joplin releases the Maple Leaf Rag, ushering in a new ragtime genre of music to the country. The Bronx Zoological Park opens in New York City. 4-month-old Sobuza II becomes the King of Swaziland, who will rule until 1982, the longest of any monarch. As we near the turn of the century, we say goodbye to the 1800s. Goodbye, friends, and see you in the next century.
Thank you, Glenn, for the news update of 1899.
You're welcome.
Oh.
Sorry, I was still in it for a minute.
Oh, yeah. You had the whole... I don't know how you did that with your voice.
The end of an era.
The end of the first era of film.
Indeed, yeah.
And also a bunch of other stuff, but who cares about history? I know we just read history, but I mean, yeah, who cares?
Yeah.
So, we'll start off with our guy, right? Our main guy.
Yeah.
Georges Méliès.
Georges Méliès? Méliès?
Méliès.
Oui.
Because, he's... he didn't invent the cut, as we saw last week. But he is the one who is really just taking all of these things and pushing them to their extremes, if not inventing new things.
Yeah. He's definitely, I think, the king right now in terms of people making movies. No one's really doing stuff quite like he is.
So what, besides the kind of obvious ones, were there any small scale Méliès films that jumped out at you this year?
Pillar of Fire.
Yeah.
Was a fun one. If for no other reason than it was a sort of stealth serpentine dance movie.
That was so surprised when I saw that.
Me too.
I was like, oh, it's going to be another Georges Méliès Conjuring movie. And then all of a sudden he conjures a serpentine dance lady.
But then it's like, the serpentine dance genre is evolving. Like now there's a whole sort of like plot and backstory.
Right.
We know where she's serpentine dancing, possibly even why.
Yeah, so some magician or whatever has summoned her out of a cauldron, and the cool thing actually is that she starts off doing a regular serpentine dance, and it's in color, it's hand painted, and toward like the second part of the serpentine dance, she gets like her dance gets kind of more like red and fiery, and kind of demonic because he can't resist making everything demonic. Even a dance.
God just loves some spooky, scary stuff.
He loves demons. He loves imps. Like literally, it would be strange to see one of his movies without some little imp in it.
Although there were a few, probably
yes,
the most notable films that he did this year were impless.
We'll get to that. I beg to differ about one of them. I thought another good one is one of his, I think it was 2 or 3 minutes long, The Devil in a Convent.
That was a fun one, for sure.
Which, it's like...
A lot of imps in that one.
A lot of imps, tons of imps. The devil rides on a frog. It's a good time. I mean, I think with these movies, we're going to be focusing more on Méliès's more substantial movies than his just kind of simple trick films, but he's really, really solidifying his substitution splices and his effects to the point that they're like nearly seamless right now, if not completely seamless. I think a lot of his trick films ended up looking really, really good this year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, because he's combining a lot of different stuff now, because he's not just doing the substitution splices. He's doing like double exposure. He's doing sort of like fade and defocusing effects to kind of blend them all together into more. They're getting so complex now that it's less sort of like, oh, I see how he did that, and it is starting to be a little bit like, wait, what? What's going on here? He's got people transforming in midair.
Yeah. There was one, I actually forget which one of these it was, but that he I think he was himself as a magician, and he had like a translucent cloth that he kind of hid himself behind, and he threw it in the air, and then he disappeared from behind this like partially see-through cloth. And I was like, wait a second, how did he do that? But yeah, I think that the action in it is super super clear, I think with a lot of this stuff, the story is a little hard to parse, but this one is pretty. The action is told visually in a really nice way. Where, what is it? There's some people in a convent, and then the devil appears.
Well, he also disguises himself as, I guess, a minister.
Yeah,
which is kind of a fun trick.
Yeah, and then he like pretends to be the minister. He calls over the nuns or whatever, and then while he's in the middle of doing a little sermon, he pops back into the devil and scares them and scandalizes them with his devilry. And then as they run away, he just like opens a portal to hell and just calls all of his friends in to party. It's so good.
I do like how, according to Méliès, like the devil's whole thing is he kind of just wants to scare people and party. Like those seem to be his main goals. Which, I can relate to that.
Yeah, I think, yes. And for like a very simple trick film, I thought The Mysterious Knight, Knight, was a good one. That one did a combination of double exposures and substitution splices. It's like this guy who is drawing a head on a chalkboard, and then he makes the head appear as real, and then he is able to like kind of put the head on top of objects, including like stabbing it with a sword and just like having it kind of like move its mouth around while it's impaled on the sword, but then like picking it back up and turning it back into a chalk drawing and stuff, and tossing it back and forth. It's neat because like he needs a black background to do the double exposure. And so having the chalkboard there as the way that the head is summoned into being is a really nice way of having that convenient black background. And the other place where you see the moving head double exposure shenanigans is in front of like a darkened fireplace. And so they're unlike not the Santa Claus, that's from the 90s. Unlike, what is it called? Santa Claus?
It's just called Santa Claus, yeah.
It doesn't need to have this big wash of blackness in front of it. He's like confining the places where he needs to do the double exposures to exactly where they are happening, which is a good use of the trick.
Yeah, Mysterious Knight I think was one of the more impressive like trick films, and the chalkboard thing really stuck out to me because I think some of the other ones had the black background, but it wasn't really integrated into the set as well, so it was a bit more. You could kind of tell what they were doing a bit more with like sometimes the background would kind of just change.
Yeah.
But they figured it out. They saw that and they, George thought I can do better. I'll put a chalkboard back there.
Yeah, it's clever. And there was this though in that one maybe more than in the others, I could see like the kind of ghostly image of the head of the body that was being like that was supposed to be invisible, but it was just kind of showing up because of the double exposure process.
Yeah.
But well done, Méliès.
Indeed.
Speaking of him doing well, though, my goodness,
boy.
he had some doozies this year.
Oh yeah.
Which one do you want to do first?
Well, I think we should start with the one that I'm pretty sure was made first, or at least shown first, which is the Dreyfus Affair.
Yes.
Very hot button, topical film, or film series, I should say.
Yeah. We alluded to this in the news segment. but the Dreyfus Affair was a big deal in France at this time. In short, I guess, because this kind of context is needed to understand the movie. There was a guy named Alfred Dreyfus who was a kind of high-ranking military guy who was Jewish, and he was accused by some other people in the military of writing being a spy for the German army, and he didn't do it, but they had him write a handwriting sample and matched it to a letter that was sent to the Germans, and based on that, they sent him to a prison on an island.
Devil's Island.
Devil's Island.
Great name for a prison island.
And there was so much complexity, and this case was so high profile. I mean, I can't really go into every aspect of it, but essentially there were all of these. It became such a media sensation that there were all of these pro-Dreyfusards and anti-Dreyfusards, and they were not fond of each other. And the anti-Dreyfusards were some of the proto-fascists of France, and the anti-Dreyfusards were. And the pros were people like Méliès, who made this pretty sympathetic film series about the entire thing, which was meant to be sort of a docudrama of a current event.
Yeah, it's sort of a sort of continuation or sort of building upon some of the films he had done, I think, in 1898, which were about the Spanish-American War, sort of dramatizing current events and to kind of create newsreels for things that no one had any footage of. Sort of reenactments of things in the news. But these are definitely a bit more in-depth, a bit more dramatic. I think originally there were 11 individual films, but only 9 are surviving.
Mm-hmm. It was originally 13 minutes long, so I think it's 11 now.
Yeah. And yeah, it's each individual film is kind of its own scene with its own set.
Depicting a different part of this big complex story that was happening in the news. And this is all like very sober and dramatically acted.
Yeah.
Weird for Méliès.
Weird for Méliès. I think weird for just any film that I've seen from this time. This is the first movie I've seen like proper dramatic acting happening. That is like beyond just like pantomime, like big, like, ooh, I'm crying, or like, oh, I'm scared. Right. It's like there's like real kind of sobering scenes of, I mean, there's a suicide in this film.
Yeah, there's like kind of graphic one.
There's blood. There's like a fight in a courtroom.
Mm-hmm. The longest part of the movie is a 2-minute long courtroom segment where Dreyfus is attempting to defend himself, and there's no dialogue or anything like that. It's just they're telling the story a little bit through the visuals, but most of what you're seeing is just some people having a dramatic argument in a courtroom.
Yeah, I had to read descriptions of each one because without knowing the sort of very kind of current details of each one, I wasn't really always sure what I was looking at.
So did I, and I mean, apparently, I don't know if this is specifically what they were made for or how they were most often shown, but I know at least in some cases they were shown with a sort of like running commentary with people with a presenter talking about what is happening in the scene.
Interesting.
And so these people who were one aspect of this movie is that it is oft reported, although not fully confirmed, that it is the first film to ever be censored. And where that seems to have come from is these people who were there describing the events were witnessing fights breaking out between anti-Dreyfusards and pro-Dreyfusards in the audience. And these films caused so many fights because this was such a hot-button issue of whether to be anti-Semitic or not, that a number of theaters might have had to stop playing the movie. And actually, unrelated to this, but because it still continued to be such a thing, all films about the Dreyfus Affair were banned in France, actually banned from 1915 to 1950. Which,
yeah.
Ugh.
Yeah. Pretty crazy. I mean, I think, a lot of these sort of individual films would be pretty impressive, but I think for their kind of, their dramatic weight and kind of just for their production value, but definitely taken as a whole, it's pretty incredible. I think this is the first, film serial to be shown in sequence. We talked a little bit about other sort of film serials that were not always shown in sequence, or sort of would be package deals of theaters would show a few of them, but not all of them. I'm pretty sure this is the first time there was ever a proper film serial that was sold as a complete package and intended to be shown as sort of a singular piece or as a sort of sequential thing.
I read that the pieces could be bought individually, but maybe they were intended to be shown together. I saw that each part was sold for $9.75 each,
which in 1899 French money was probably a chunk of change. I don't know.
I have not looked that up.
Méliès being Méliès, he still has to put some effects in there. There's a cool scene of a boat arriving on a stormy night that has some cool double exposure lightning. Yeah.
It is still kind of cartoony, which is odd for this film series.
It is a bit, yeah. It feels like something out of his spooky castle movies.
Yeah.
And we're supposed to be taking this very serious current event of this guy who's been wrongfully imprisoned. And then there's some spooky lightning.
But yeah, Méliès plays some people. So at times he has said that he was trying to be as even-handed as possible with this documentary, with this docudrama. But there are some things that indicate, just from the way the movie is presented and the sympathy with which Dreyfus is presented, I think that Méliès was taking a stand there. And also he cast himself as Méliès's lawyer, who at one point had an attempted assassination on him.
Yeah. He was shot in the street.
Yes. And at least if you trust the way that Méliès depicted it, everybody walked by and did not tend to this man that was dying in the street.
Yeah, I don't know if that part, how accurate that part is. But
probably not.
It's a pretty dramatic scene. Méliès is definitely, he's known for his much more kind of fun, lively stuff, and this is just a scene of a guy getting shot in the street and then left there. And this was, I think, one of the more impressive movies, if taken as a whole, I guess. It's definitely one of the most impressive things that I've seen so far.
Yeah, me too. If you throw some title cards in there, that makes a fully coherent story that is fairly gripping at points.
Yeah, and the big fight in the courthouse is a whole room full of people just kind of breaking out into a brawl, which is always just dramatic to see. It doesn't matter if it's black and white and silent and shot from a single angle. There's people kind of spilling out towards the camera and kind of almost covering the lens at times. Especially that at the end of this sort of like long, especially without dialogue, somewhat dry, just kind of courtroom scene. That definitely made a splash. I think the movie did make it was a pretty big deal when it was released.
Yeah, it seems that way. It was not necessarily as much compared to the movie we're about to talk about, but it made a big, as you said, it made a big splash. And it was a bit of an inflection point, as this story already was.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool movie.
Yeah.
Cool movie, bro.
Cool movie number 2 is Cinderella. It is the 1899 Cinderella, the first fairy tale. I don't know if I feel confident about saying that. But
I don't know. There was the Cabbage Patch kids movie that Lucy Guy Blanchet made. That's a lost film, but I think that counts.
It feels okay. So this feels very fairy tale like.
It does.
Well,
yeah.
It is a fairy tale, but like I feel like it really sells it. You know, this movie. It feels whimsical and coherent in a way that and it feels like a coherent narrative in the way that not a lot of other stuff has to this point. I mean, we all know the story of Cinderella, but it tells it so confidently.
Yeah. Maybe it is because I'm just more familiar with the story of Cinderella, but this was easily the most like coherent storytelling I've seen from a film so far. Also, this thing is like, you know, Dreyfus Affair was like individual films that add up to this like longer serial. This is was made and intended to be a single film, was shown as a single film, and it's 5 minutes. I think it's the longest single film we've watched. And
well, besides the boxing
Oh,
matches.
that doesn't count. And it's got multiple scenes in one film.
Yeah, there are 6 scenes, I believe, and 5 different sets.
Yeah,
which is wild. And this is also the thing that this is the first to do, is the first film to have a dissolve in it, or a dissolve between scenes.
Right. Yeah.
And I think that dissolve is done so effectively. It's at the end of the first scene, so the fairy godmother has gotten Cinderella all ready to go to the ball. She walks off the stage, and then the fairy godmother disappears, and then you kind of dissolve into the party, and you see people dancing, and it really like sells the time passing, which is a sort of a new concept of time passing between shots. And,
right. Yeah.
And it sells the kind of like dreamy, motion in the story, I think.
Yeah. Oh man, what else to say about this? I gotta go back to my notes. I was just pulling up the movie again to watch the dissolve. Yeah, it's definitely, I think it's one of the more, maybe also the most kind of ambitious single film that we've seen so far. I mean, it's got a big cast, it's got lots of extras, it's got dancers. It's such kind of this like big lavish production. It's got dancing clocks.
This movie is another case, by the way, where he can't resist putting imps in it,
right?
Because normally when so she's at the party and the clock is about to strike midnight. We all know how in Cinderella she can't stay at the party past midnight because that's her bedtime, and as the clock is getting near midnight, I believe it's Méliès himself is like, it just jumps out of a clock. And, and he's wearing like a little imp costume.
A sinister clock imp appears.
He plays a sinister clock imp, and he just holds a big clock and dances back and forth and goes like, your time's coming. and he can't resist.
And then a whole room full of clocks starts dancing.
Yeah, she gets back, so she runs out of the frame. The prince finds her slipper, and they kind of hold on that moment in a way that is also, I think, kind of good storytelling. You gets at the emotions going on, right? She runs away, and then he just kind of like holds the shoe and looks off in the distance, and it goes back to her house. And I don't understand what the idea with the clocks is here, unless it's just some kind of clocky nightmare that she's having. Because she is already back, but then a bunch of clocks start dancing in her house.
Right. She's just afraid of the concept of time at that point. Mayhaps. Yeah, that's the one part that feels a little bit like it's being maybe a bit overindulgent, I guess.
I found it fun. I mean,
me too.
But
I loved it.
I didn't really know what the point of it was.
Yeah, what a picture.
What a picture.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it has some cool like transformation effects with the carriage and the mice and everything like that.
Right, yeah, the mice were fun.
Yeah.
How there's like sort of like little almost like cardboard cutout mice that then turn into people crawling that then stand up.
Yeah, they turn from little mice to human-sized mice to little people crawling to fancy boys who drive a carriage.
Yeah. The proper, sequence of mouse to fancy boy.
The earliest... No, that can't be. I was going to say like the earliest Sailor Moon transformation sequence from a mouse to a man, but we've done transformations.
Have we done mouse to man though?
Probably not.
Okay.
A film first, the first mouse to man transformation.
Yeah. Hey, that's
a movie staple from here
on. Yeah, I mean, but this is probably my favorite movie that I watched for this year.
Yeah. The Dreyfus Affair is really cool, but it's also a little
it's kind of a downer, man.
It's a downer. It was made before Dreyfus was acquitted. So it did not actually have that part, and so it just ends on a downer.
Yeah. Well, it also, I mean, the Dreyfus Affair is like, the individual kind of scenes are really impressive and sort of ambitious, but I feel like overall, I don't really feel like I got a better sense of what happened. Like, I don't really... It's sort of dramatizing all of these sort of individual events, but without a sort of real understanding of what all those events mean together and sort of, everything, all the sort of stuff surrounding them. I had to do a lot of additional reading to even really understand what each of the scenes were.
Yeah, same.
Whereas Cinderella is kind of, again, like, I'm loosely familiar with the story already, but even without that, I think it's pretty clear. Maybe not all the rules of the, like, time limit of the pumpkin carriage and things, but it's pretty straightforward. It's simplified to a degree where it plays in just this sort of silent kind of stagey way.
Yeah. Well, so Cinderella, we kind of, I believe it came out close to the end of the year, and something that happened earlier in the year, which was a kind of further solidification of this new idea of edits, was The Kiss in the Tunnel by George Albert Smith.
A daring combination of two genres.
Yeah, the kissing genre and the train genre. So this is apparently the first use of a number of scenes to tell one narrative, so like 3 scenes. So a train enters a tunnel. It starts off as a regular Phantom Ride movie, this like the Pillar of Fire. This is a stealth one old-timey genre movie inside of another old-timey genre of movie. So it starts out as a Phantom Ride movie. You're on a train. It's heading into a tunnel, and then as it goes into a tunnel, it cuts to a shot in studio segment of some people on a set that looks like a darkened inside of a train car.
Kind of just a flat backdrop of a train compartment.
And then they take advantage of the darkness and smooch, and then it cuts back out again
in a very kind of 1899. There's a lot of what's the right word? I don't know. It's very pantomime-y.
Yeah,
and
it's playful and big.
Yeah.
And when they're done, it cuts back out again, and back to the Phantom Ride view, and you see the train exiting the tunnel and continuing on, and presumably they quit their shenanigans.
Yeah. They can no longer smooch while in daylight.
No, they're like vampires.
Yeah. George Albert Smith made that film. I think that's his only surviving film from this year. Mm-hmm. Who we've talked about before, who makes a lot of silly, kind of comedic movies.
Yeah, and he's also a pioneer of certain storytelling methods, like he was with Santa Claus last year.
Right. Yeah. Because this is, I think, the only really cuts we've seen before are in documentaries, which they're not really continuity cuts. They're just sort of cutting around to different camera angles,
narrative cuts. Yeah.
And then there was the Come Along Do, which was just inside outside, whereas this is sort of train goes in a tunnel, we see inside the train, and then we cut back outside the train, which is a bit more...
Unlike Come Along Do, where the scenes don't really have too much to do with each other.
Yeah.
Like, this is actually using the cuts to tell part of the story.
Yeah, exactly.
Because it... As you move toward the tunnel, and then it zooms into the train to show you what is happening inside now that the train is in the tunnel, and then it zooms back out again to give you the greater context once more.
Yeah.
So like the two environments that are in the movie are informed by each other, which is more than you can say for Come Along Do.
Yeah. Yeah, that was pretty... Those scenes didn't really need each other. All right, I guess the surviving outside scene, nothing really happens.
Something that I read too about this is that it was intended to be hot swappable with any train movie. So they actually let people cut the kissing scene out so they could put it into any other train going into a tunnel Phantom Ride, and just customize the movie to their liking. Wow.
That's something that doesn't really exist anymore, I guess. Put the scene anywhere, it doesn't matter. It was remade in the same year by a different filmmaker, James Bamforth, which I guess that combines the kissing and train pulling into station genres.
Yeah, yes. It was three. It started out as a Phantom Ride, then the kissing genre, and then it didn't go back to the Phantom Ride. It went to a side view of the station as the train arrives.
Right. Pretty much the same thing. I mean, it's the train car set, I guess, is a little bit more realistic. There's a bit more smooching happening. But I think it's... We talked a little bit about how everyone's kind of copying off each other, and I think it's funny that the same year, someone's just like, I got this.
Well, not just that. Also that same year, James Bamforth made The Biter Bit. Which is a rip-off of The Sprinkler Sprinkled.
Yeah. James Bamforth, really not the most original filmmaker working in 1899, apparently. What else we got to talk about? We watched some Lumière brothers pictures.
Yeah.
They're still doing stuff.
They're mixing in their actualities with some somewhat light trick films and effects films and whatnot. As far as their actualities, I really like that one, Lancement du Varese. I don't know. It was another ship launch film.
Yeah. Lancement du Varese à Livourne. I don't know.
Yeah. Although that rush of water as the ship landed freaked me out a little bit. I was like, oh no, not
really,
again. You know?
Yeah, it does. It does sort of strike a different chord, knowing what happened to the other one.
It's really cool though. Like the boat. I mean, like their 1896 boat launch movie. It's really imposingly huge.
Yeah,
this ship.
It gives a real good sense of the scale of it.
Yeah, and this one's on like a 3/4 angle of the the boat going away and to the right from the frame. Just a cool actuality.
Yeah, they had one of sort of a jousting tournament, which took me a bit off guard. I wasn't really familiar with French jousting happening in 1899, but apparently maybe there was a Ren Fair happening.
I didn't see that one.
There's Parade of Flowered Automobiles, which is pretty notable, as far as I can tell, for being the first movie to show someone filming a movie on screen.
Meta.
Yeah. The first movie about making movies.
You could say. Although, I saw someone saying, I think maybe on Letterboxd, about that movie, is that the Lumières had established their angle, their beloved angle of just things moving across the frame and to the left toward the camera vaguely, that you can see yet another person, like assumedly some just random other guy who's filming a movie in front of them also using that same shot.
Oh, interesting. I had assumed it was like one of their other camera people.
It could be, yeah. Who knows?
That is funny to think there's just some other guy with a camera who's trying to horn in on their patented angle.
They're like, hey, get out of here.
We got the Lumière angle. There was a few that were shot in Vietnam. One of which, called Smoking the Opium, was maybe the darkest thing I've seen on film.
That was sad.
So sad, so dark. Whoa, Nelly.
It's literally just like some like two people who are almost incapacitated on the ground, and they're like loading up an opium pipe and smoking from it, and they just look sad.
Yeah.
They don't look good at all.
It is I think easily the most sort of like intense like picture of human suffering that has been captured on film up to this point.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, that's a benefit of the Lumière style, I would say, over a more fictional Méliès style. I mean, we're impressed with Georges Méliès making the Dreyfus Affair as a pretty sober, serious thing, but it's still stagey to a degree, and it's still a little set up. And this is literally just a grim portrait of reality.
Yeah, and reality, it is sort of like the Dreyfus Affair for the time is very dramatic, but compared to a dramatic film now, it's nothing. It's like this old goofy thing. Yeah. Whereas this film is just reality is still sad. Right. Like reality back in 1999 was still tragic and kind of sobering. I think is probably a good word for it.
Yeah, and I mean, opiates that reaches out into today, doesn't it?
Yeah. They also had some cats doing tricks.
Yeah.
So Lumiere's really trying to get everyone.
Yeah, they were shooting hundreds and hundreds of movies. They were just doing all the stuff that they could, really.
Yeah, I mean, I tried to watch a lot of their movies from this year, and I mean, a lot of them are lost. There were some I looked for that I couldn't find. I think there's the one with the guy with the camera, the parade of flowered automobiles, is the cars coming back, I think, after leaving. Like, it's part of the title is Return. And so theoretically there would be a departure film, I guess. But I couldn't find it anywhere.
Well, there was one Lumière film that I thought was really neat, which was, oh my god, La Poupée, Act 2, La Cure et les Mannequins.
Ah, oui. The Priest and the Mannequins, I believe, would be the English translation.
I believe so. And man, talk about robots going amok movie.
Yeah.
If you were questioning whether the one from a week or two ago qualified as a robot going amok movie, this one definitely qualifies.
Yeah.
I mean, what even happens in it? It's like there's just a guy who's standing there. Does he even do anything to activate them? They just activate.
I don't think. Yeah.
There's a bunch of automatons around him.
Automatons activate.
Yeah, some of which seem to be real. I think there's like one person. There's one that's like a person doing a repetitive motion that's trying to look like a robot. But there's like a robot dog that's barking, and there's a robot little baby that's jumping around. And it's cool to see this other aspect of late 1800s culture of automatons.
Right, yeah. That is cool, because that isn't really a thing that exists anymore. Like, that isn't like an attraction of just sort of like simplistic like robots that have a task that they can perform.
Mm-hmm. Unless you get a Stu Leonard's.
True. We can use that as a segue to another sort of aspect of 1890s culture with Alice Guy Blanchet's wonderful Absinthe.
All right.
Great title.
This movie was like, so it's like a comedy.
Yeah.
But like the kind of comedy silent film shenanigans were such complex action that I had to like rewatch it a couple times to figure out exactly what had happened, you know? There's like a guy that sits down at a restaurant, like a fancy guy with a top hat, and he puts it on the table next to him. And this was the stuff that I had to like go back to like figure out the exact order of events because there's so much chaos. He puts the table on he puts his hat down on the table that's next to him. And he starts reading from a newspaper, and the waiter brings him his drink, and he's sipping from the drink. And then as he's doing that, another group of people come and sit down at that table where he put the hat down. And so the waiter sees that the hat is in the way of these other people's table, and so he moves the guy's hat over to his own table. And while the guy is distracted reading the newspaper, he pours himself some more absinthe, but he pours it into his hat instead of the glass. And so then he takes a sip from the glass, and it's empty. So he turns around and gets mad at the server, and he gets all in a huff, and he puts his hat on, and then a bunch of absinthe spills down onto his head, and he storms away. Or the waiter actually chases him away by spraying soda onto him. And then the second group of people who are at the table, they just point and laugh at this silly man, and that is wonderful absinthe. It's kind of complex physical comedy shenanigans, but I thought it was pretty funny.
Yeah, it might be the first use of the seltzer bottle as a comedy prop. Classic pressurized soda bottle. I don't know, something just I think is funny about someone making a film kind of about absinthe because like 1899, as far as I know, was like peak absinthe drinking time.
I don't know. I know it was old-timey. I don't know when was the peak.
Yeah. But it was something that a lot of these sort of have fun little kind of peeks into the contemporary culture from when they were made. Which, I mean, there's not really a lot about, like, absinthe drinking in this movie. It could really be any spirit, I think. No green fairy appears at any point. But I think it's also funny, the two surviving films by Elise Guy Blanchet from 1899 are Wonderful Absinthe and At the Club, which is another kind of drunken fighting movie. I don't know what that says about what she was up to that year. Doing a lot of clubbing at all the French absinthe clubs.
Yes, and I just verified what you were saying, that it was popular in the late 19th and earliest 20th century France, particularly among artists and writers.
Oh boy!
Maybe they were mocking some kind of hoity-toity Parisian writer as this guy.
Maybe there was a spate of people pouring absinthe into their hats accidentally at the time, and so it was a very topical joke. I mean, neither of these were really like, I feel like some of the other movies that she made in previous years were sort of more ambitious or impressive. These were just kind of fun, slapsticky, drunk movies.
Yeah. Which it's the kind of slapstick shenanigans stuff is becoming a genre, but I think that it's not getting, like, as well done as something like a Buster Keaton or a Charlie Chaplin, to the point where this stuff is interesting. It's all just kind of very little gags and then it's over. Whereas I think we're finding a lot more interest in where other types of film are going right now.
Yeah. It definitely hasn't kind of solidified itself into the kind of, well, I don't know. I mean, I tend to think of slapstick as kind of the primary genre of, like, 1920s films. But as we might find out, that might not be true. That might just be what we're used to seeing.
Yeah.
So
we'll see, I guess.
I also watched some movies from Edison this year, which were very weird. The two things that stuck out to me were a lot of parades and animal cruelty, which I get the sense are just things that Edison are really into.
I guess that lines up with what we know about the man.
I mean, the elephant thing he's been acquitted of, though, right? He wasn't actually involved in that?
Right, yes.
Okay. So I can't blame him for that, but still.
But as for being weirdly abusive to bears.
Yeah. I guess the two I'm talking about there are two films called Trick Bears and Fun in Camp, which is the most liberal use of fun in camp I have ever heard. Trick Bears is like children riding around on small bears.
Yeah, and some, like, trained circus-style bears doing various walking on their hind legs type tricks.
Which is not doesn't immediately strike itself as, like, horrifying, but if you know much about how, like, circus animals were treated at the time, it is a bit like, well, they were probably trained to walk on their hind legs by abuse, so. And then we get to see a bit of that with Fun in Camp, when right off the bat there's just a guy kicking a bear. And then we see just a very strange footage of bears doing tricks, and it's almost like, I don't know, if I happened upon that out of context, I would be very suspect. I'd be like, what is this weird bear cult shit happening?
Bear cult is Midsummer, and we haven't we're not there yet.
We got a little time before we get to 2018.
But the one of the things about Fun Camp is that it is it is meant to be a camp in the Spanish-American War, in a like a military camp. So it's more of the. I don't think it's real, but it's more of this kind of faux letters from the war, you know, that you're getting from Méliès or whoever.
Yeah.
These attempts at connecting people to current events.
Yeah. Another one like that Edison did was Admiral Dewey landing at Gibraltar, which is kind of a cool shot of like a boat approaching a dock, and the boat starts way off in the background and sort of approaches, gets closer and closer to the foreground until it's in the sort of like bit more of like a medium wide shot of it.
Yeah, the cool thing about that one is that there's some little boats in the foreground that are just rocking back and forth as the boat is approaching, and it gives it some good depth.
Just a very well composed shot and like use of use of depth, but way too long. It's like, I don't know, a minute and a half, just a boat coming towards the camera. Overall wasn't too impressed with Edison's films from this year.
Nah, me either.
Yeah, other than that, I have a few more sort of assorted films.
Let's hear your assortments.
So some of the assortment of other films that I watched or read about. Two that I read about but could not find, or at least could only find fragments of, were the Jeffrey Sharkey fight, which was another boxing match filmed in its entirety.
Over 2 hours long, that one. The second feature film, quote unquote.
It is now presumed lost, which is a real shame. I'm not a big fan of these. Not really a fan of these.
It's a real shame. Who cares? But whatever.
I'm not really a fan of these multi-hour boxing films. But you know, they're no Cinderella Man. Let me tell you.
No.
The first known Shakespeare film, King John.
Yep.
Which only a few parts survive. It was directed by W.K. Dixon, who is a guy we've talked about, a notable American filmmaker.
I think he's Scottish.
Oh, is he? He was making films in...
Yeah, I think he moved to America and started working with Edison, and then he moved back to England to form the Mutoscope and Biograph Company.
Oh, interesting. See, you've done the reading. I clearly haven't. The few parts of it that I was able to watch do feel very much like kind of Shakespeare on stage that happens to be filmed.
Yeah, I mean, it literally was. They were filming a practice of a Shakespeare play or a Shakespeare production that was about to start in London.
That segues nicely into another film, Maple Leaf Viewing, or
Momijigari.
Momijigari. Thank you for giving me the correct pronunciation.
Oh, yeah. You give me the cultured French pronunciations, and I'll give you the weeaboo pronunciations.
I'm giving the very uncultured French pronunciations. I'm giving you the cartoon voice French pronunciations of everything. But this is the earliest surviving Japanese film, which is pretty rad. Unlike the Lumière films, which are just French movies shot in Japan. And it is a film of kabuki theater, which is also pretty cool. There's some wig fighting. I don't really know how else to describe it.
That was pretty neat. Yeah, it's a couple scenes, so it has cuts. It's not the earliest Japanese film, but it's the earliest surviving one. Mm-hmm. So they learned by this point how to have multiple scenes with cuts in between. There are title cards describing what what the narrative is, and so there's it's an adaptation of a play. There's a woman who is setting up a banquet for Maple Leaf Viewing, but what you see in the movie is just her dancing around, and then in the story, there's a samurai who passes by, and she convinces him to get drunk. He falls asleep, and then it turns out the woman is a demon who attacks him.
With hair.
With hair. So with, like, long hair. And, it's like swinging giant locks around in combat with a sword. Honestly, like, there's something about this action that felt very reminiscent of a lot of Japanese action just from even now. There's something about the way that it was presented, the way that there were pauses as they kind of like stared at each other as the samurai moved back, and I think just like the choreography of it, there was something that I felt like evoked all sorts of Japanese cinema that I've seen, from like Kurosawa to anime to all that other kind of stuff. And so it's interesting that, like, since this was an adaptation of a kabuki play, that like maybe that Japanese idea of what combat was supposed to look like was already extant before they even started filming combat.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, that would make sense to me. Yeah. That kind of very kind of particular sense of timing and pacing with fight scenes could have originated through kabuki theater or through that kind of stage fighting. Yeah, I don't know. That is a very interesting question to be posed, though.
That's my take. That's my...
I think this is, as far as I can tell, maybe the first movie that was... Well, it wasn't... One notable thing is it wasn't intended to really be exhibited as a film. It was intended only to be kind of a record of this performance.
Oh, really?
But one of the two actors who were... I do not know if I wrote down their names, unfortunately. It starred two very well-known, famous kabuki theater actors, and one of them became gravely ill and could not perform, and so they showed this film in its place.
What? Wow.
So it was shown in like a big, like a proper theater also, which is pretty cool. And it's, as far as I can tell, maybe the first movie that was sort of, maybe not marketed is the wrong word, but like, that was sort of built on the fame of its actors more than anything else.
Oh, interesting.
Like, I feel like a lot of these other movies, the draw is really sort of the kind of like the effects of them or the underlying story, their adaptations of literature or plays. So is this, but it's like, these are very famous, well-known actors, and it's also, I think, the first movie that has on-screen credits. In the title cards at the beginning, at least the version I watched, had, old title cards that included credits for the two actors.
Oh, I just saw a title card in Japanese, so I didn't. No,
mine had
enter it into my brain.
Mine had English translations at the bottom. So yeah, I mean, I don't know if it is actually the first time that
of like filmic celebrity culture.
Yeah, but it's the first time I've sort of noticed it, or I've been like, oh, like this is a thing where the actors are really kind of the main draw.
Yeah. I guess a couple other spare things are Upside Down or The Human Flies.
Yeah. Didn't care for that one.
You didn't care for that one?
No. It's funny how we've gotten to a point now where like Méliès is making really impressive movies.
Yeah.
And like, there's like a couple people, there's like Méliès, Guy Blanchet, and
George Albert Smith,
who are like just making bangers one after another, like just always making good stuff. And so now I'm watching some of the things that other people are making, and they're not good. Like, I'm really not impressed with some of the other things that are coming out. Like, Upside Down or The Human Flies, which is the whole title. It isn't, like, two separate. It's kind of a Doctor Strangelove situation. is it's just abject nonsense.
Wow, this is our first like negative review here on the show.
I don't know. I think this is the first year I've watched that film. I was like, no, not for me.
I thought it was fun. I mean, it's like a simple trick film. It doesn't really do much innovative, except it does have a new trick of there's a guy doing magicians for some there's a magician doing some stuff for people in a party, and there's some kind of common tricks that you would see, like a thing on a wire or a substitution splice. But then there's a point where he flips gravity upside down. Right. Not the room itself, but gravity, and so I suppose the camera is upside down.
I think they must have at the very least just turned the backdrop upside down as well, because the room appears to stay stationary, but the actors appear to be upside down on the ceiling. And then
this might be getting to some of the nonsense that you say, is that so all of the patrons of the magic show are now on the ceiling, and they just do some kind of dances on the ceiling.
They just do a bunch of somersaults and stuff.
Yeah, it's like, I don't know why they're doing these somersaults, but they're just kind of having a little party on the ceiling.
Yeah, and it's I don't know. I wasn't feeling that one. There was this one. There's like 3 titles that I've heard associated with this film: Ladies' Skirts Nailed to a Fence, Women's Rights, and Gossips and Eavesdroppers, which is the only one that really makes sense to me. I guess the skirts nailed to a fence is also pretty descriptive. Which is another Bamforth film. He of little originality. This was another one that I didn't think was very good. I think it's more interesting to talk about, though. It's some ladies gossiping, I guess, behind a fence. Yeah. And then some rascals come around to the other side of the fence and nail their skirts to the fence. And then the ladies try to run away, and they can't because they're nailed to the fence.
He does what it says on the tin.
Exactly. Back when they actually had a tin.
True.
But it's interesting in that there's a single set, and there's no cuts, and the way they try to get around the fact there are no cuts is they have the actors move to the other side of the fence to show.
Yeah, there is a cut, but it's the camera doesn't move, right? And the set doesn't move, and so it's actually only a little visually confusing what's happening until you realize that, like, so the ladies are on the near side of the fence, and then all of a sudden they're on the far side of the fence. But, like, nothing has shifted. The fence is asymmetrical, so it's very clear that they have just moved to the other side rather than the camera moving to the other side, which is the implication. And then the rascals come up, nail their skirts to the fence, and then it flips back again with their skirts nailed to the fence.
I actually didn't even realize that was what the intended effect was supposed to be until I read more about this film, and I was like, oh, I see what they were trying to do there.
Right.
But it was done so poorly that I didn't even get that.
Up your game, James Bamforth.
Really?
Up your game.
Really?
So I don't know if you saw the reason why it's called Women's Rights. There's some, like, ancillary materials that were released with the film that was describing what the women were gossiping about, and they were, and according to this, they were gossiping about women's rights, which was sort of becoming a thing. I saw that Emmeline Pankhurst would found the first suffragette movement in 4 years, like 4 years later, to address women's growing grievances, particularly in being denied the vote.
Women voting? Not in this century.
Yeah. So, the implication here, to throw even more shade at this guy is that is not just a simple prank, but is like a retributive thing for these women discussing women's rights, and
right.
so they deserve to have their skirts nailed to a fence.
Not only is it poorly made, it's also gross. Yeah, we're not fans of Bamforth here on this podcast.
Nope. This is the year where we we take the gloves off. You
know?
Oh
yeah. Some other fun ones were In the Grip of the Blizzard, which was footage of the aforementioned from the news segment blizzard, I suppose, in New York City. I think specifically Union Square. It is I believe the first time I have really noticed a panning camera.
Yeah, so I actually found a pan from that's also shot in New York from 1897.
Okay.
I was going to mention that, but yeah, this is definitely the other one was a pan back and forth, and this one goes 360 degrees around an axis.
Right, which is
just
very
gets the
cool.
entire scene.
Yeah.
So you see a lot of old-timey New York in one shot.
Mm-hmm. There's another similar film, which is Panorama from the Tower of the Brooklyn Bridge, which gives a nice sort of view of, what you can see. It's a pretty degraded film at this point, but what you can see is a cool sort of look into old-timey New York skyline.
Those are both from the American Mutoscope and Biograph Company too.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I guess that about wraps it up then.
Yeah. One thing I would like to introduce to the podcast is at the end. At least we should try to kind of come up with what our favorite film for the year is.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure mine was Cinderella, the Méliès Cinderella.
I would pick Cinderella if I weren't ruined because the Flickr Alley collection just threw the 1912 Cinderella at me and made me think that it was the 1899 one. And so when I watched the 1899 one, I was less impressed in comparison. So
terrible.
Which is unfair, but I'd say that the Dreyfus Affair is probably my favorite.
Yeah.
I feel like it's quite ambitious in a different way, and it's something so new.
Yeah. Definitely a close second, I think, for me.
Méliès killing it once again.
Yeah. Can't be stopped.
Well, I suppose that's all for this week. We'll see you all in the next century.
Ooh.
1900. Wonder what's coming for us that year. You can find all of our stuff at well, we don't really have a website per se.
No.
Linktree, if you're familiar, linktr.ee/1w1y.
That just rolls off the tongue, doesn't it?
Gross. You know what? What, do I have to make a website now? Ugh.
Squarespace, build it beautiful.
Oh no, not yet.
Sponsor us, Squarespace.
for our 16 listeners.
Stamps.com. Tryquip.com.
We have a YouTube page where I am putting all of the playlists of the... Man, I should really mention this at the top of the show. We have a YouTube page where I'm putting playlists of all of the movies that we watch. And then hopefully in the near future, what I'll be doing is importing these podcasts into Premiere and just putting the movies looping over while we're talking. I think that might be fun.
That would be fun.
Relatively low effort. And since they're silent,
easy.
That works.
Yeah.
They're silent and copyright free, so we can do whatever we want.
We can get away with it for at least a little while.
Until 1924. So yeah, check out our YouTube page. There will be a link in the show notes. Actually, there will be a link to all of our stuff in the show notes. Click the show notes. Why am I even saying this? There's a Twitter. We haven't done anything with it yet. I don't know, Glenn. You want to be Twitter Lord? We'll see. And anyway, I'll see y'all next week. I'll see you next week, Glenn.
See you next week.
See you next week.
See you next week.
Bye.